Hello, my name is Bruce Pinkleton and I'm Dean of the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication at Washington State University. It's my honor to be here this evening as we celebrate the legacy of Edward R. Murrow at our 45th Murrow Symposium. Thank you for joining us tonight. For those of us affiliated with Murrow College, this is a momentous evening, the result of hours of planning and support from a wide variety of donors. I am grateful to all who contribute to the Murrow College supporting students, faculty, and staff and making this and other events possible. With campuses in Pullman, Everett, and Vancouver, faculty in the Murrow College of Communication aspire to teach students the ethical courage, innovation, and professional excellence embodied by Edward R. Murrow as they prepare to work in the evolving fields of journalism and communication. With your help, the students we serve are better prepared to launch their careers, serve the greater needs of our society, and succeed in the workplace and in life. Thank you for your generosity. Edward R. Murrow graduated from Washington State University in 1930 and did much of his important work as a journalist in the 1940s, 50s, and early 1960s. In an age when social and digital media have transformed how we communicate and consume news, the natural presumption would be that Murrow's principles and work, while outstanding for their time, are irrelevant today. This presumption is in error. Instead, we find ourselves in a time when Murrow's wisdom and words are as relevant as the day he first spoke them. When Murrow said, "To be persuasive, we must be believable. To be believable, we must be credible. To be credible, we must be truthful." Or that the speed of communications is wondrous to behold. It is also true that speed can multiply the distribution of information that we know to be untrue. He might have been speaking about recent news and events. In a real sense, our mission in the Murrow College is to teach and inspire students in keeping with the legacy of Edward R. Murrow. We do that tonight by honoring Lester Holt with the Murrow Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism. Historically, in its role as a fourth estate, journalism has served a critical role in the health of free societies by monitoring and tempering the influence of those in power. By serving as observers to those in government and other organizations, and by holding them accountable for their actions and outcomes, journalists contribute to the flow of truthful information free societies require. Despite living in a time of tremendous information availability, it's possible that we have never been in greater need of information we can trust. A pandemic that has fundamentally changed the way we live, learn, and work, pervasive racial tension and societal unrest amid increasing calls for social justice, a recent antagonistic and combative presidential election, widespread distrust in political processes we've taken for granted, and an assault on a critical institution of our democracy. Together, these and other events have amplified the need for journalists who tell the unadorned truth with accuracy and balance, a reflection of the standards and legacy of Edward R. Murrow. For decades, faculty in the Murrow College of Communication have recognized and honored the achievements of journalists and communication professionals at the Murrow Symposium. Murrow Award honorees have a demonstrated commitment to the ethical standards, courage, and professional excellence exemplified by Edward R. Murrow, as he reported from Buchenwald during World War II, challenged the abuses of power by Senator Joseph McCarthy, or reported on the plight of migratory farm workers in Harvest of Shame. In continuing this tradition tonight, we honor a journalist who personifies Murrow's ethical courage and commitment to seeking and telling the truth by presenting Lester Holt with a 2021 Murrow College Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism. As the anchor of NBC Nightly News, Mr. Holt has navigated one of the most tumultuous years in American history, broadcasting stories of tragedy and hope into American homes with truth, empathy, and dignity. In a time of fraught political discourse, Mr. Holt has reminded us of the values and ideals that unify us, prioritizing knowledge over information and reminding us that better days are ahead. To paraphrase him, the sun will rise again as it always does.
I'm Lester Holt. I'm Lester Holt reporting from New York. Welcome to Today on a Saturday and a Sunday. This is Dateline. Nightly news begins right now.
I think Lester is one of the true journalists of our time.
In those moments of importance, the moments of crisis in America, Lester is really the steady force.
When it comes down to it, down to his core, he's a reporter. He wants to be there.
He's tireless and dogged and will do whatever it takes to really bring the viewers into the heart of a story.
He pours himself into the work and it elevates everyone around him.
He is smart, he is tenacious, he is kind.
He represents the best of our reporting around the world.
When I think about Lester, I think of someone who is unflappable. He's a great broadcaster, he's a great writer, he's a great interviewer, he's a great journalist. He's like the Swiss Army knife with all the tools.
You couldn't find one person in this very big building here at 30 Rockefeller Center who doesn't believe that Lester Holt has one thing in mind when he sits down at that anchor desk every night, and that is giving the news in a fair and true and honest way.
He's the dean of nightly news anchors, and as such, he represents solid reporting, the serious journalism, but also the human factors.
Trust is our most important currency, isn't it? Lester may be the richest man in America in that regard. People see him and they say, we know that guy. We trust that guy.
We go in on the darkest day for these towns and these people. It's their worst day. And we show up. And what Lester brings is compassion.
It's that level of respect for the story, respect for the facts and the truth, and just respect for fellow human beings that speaks volumes to the character of my dad.
I think Lester's legacy is integrity and decency. Somebody who has just been quietly excellent for decades.
Back in his early days in local television when he used to listen to the police scanners, Lester is still that guy.
It's kind of like the TV show Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And that is the magic of Lester Holt.
Lester Holt is a daily example that you can be both a good person and a good journalist, that you can be both a kind-hearted, generous person and a leader.
I don't think Lester is ever going to be defined by one story. His compassion, his kindness, and his respect for the profession of journalism. That's what he's going to be remembered for.
Our job is always to press for answers and to hold our leaders accountable. That's the calling of journalists everywhere, and we are doing our fullest to respond because information and straight talk can overcome fear. I'm Lester Holt, and for all my colleagues at NBC News, many of them working at home, take care and take care of each other.
Whether broadcasting from political hotspots across the globe or from American neighborhoods, Mr. Holt has a deserved reputation for delivering the truth with balance and humanity. In recognition of his prolific career in journalism, we are honored to present Mr. Lester Holt with the 2021 Edward R. Murrow College of Communication Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism.
Welcome, everyone. President Schultz, Dean Pinkleton, the Edward R. Murrow College of Communications, and Washington State University, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the distinct honor. It goes without saying that I would have preferred to be with you in person on this day. I'm sure you would have liked that too. I remember the days leading up to last year's event. There was this growing sense of unease about the virus, whether the symposium would happen. Was it the right thing to do? Should I cancel? Will the university cancel? Well, I'm grateful, of course, that it was wisely postponed. I am, though, deeply disappointed that we still can't be together. I feel like we're getting close. I'm much better at these sorts of things when I look you in the eyes. I'll just say that from the beginning. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to call for a ban on the word virtual when this pandemic is under control. While it has allowed us to do things we otherwise couldn't, it also reminds me of what has been taken from us in this past year. A year ago, at about the same time events such as this were canceling, I sat in one of the last face-to-face editorial meetings with my nightly news team, and I told them I'd seen a lot in my 40-year news career, but that we were all about to face what really would be the story of a lifetime, that this would define them. It would be the story they would tell for ages to come. Every day is a new chapter. And every other story that has occurred since has been amplified by the pandemic, kind of fueling this collective distress, this sense of the wheels are coming off the bus. In those 40 years, I've never felt prouder to be working in this business than I am right now. The country has relied on our work to understand and navigate this unprecedented threat. It's the role that brought many of us into journalism. But there have also been cross-currents that have made our mission more difficult, which I'll discuss in a few moments. Let me just say off the top, that it may disappoint some of you to know that most of what I learned about journalism I acquired outside the classroom. And please, I mean no disrespect, I only wish I would have had the opportunity to be part of a program such as yours. And among my few regrets is that I took shortcuts with my education. But I am largely a product of on-the-job training, and now here I am sharing with you what I have learned. Now, after dropping that in your lap, I suppose I owe you at least the short version of the story, which is I began working in radio as a weekend overnight disc jockey when I was still in high school. At the same time, I worked summers as an unpaid and very unofficial intern at the Public Affairs Department of the NBC TV station in Sacramento. I literally showed up at their lobby and I said I'd like to help and work for free. Somebody took a liking to me and there I was. Later, in order to work full-time and make some money at the radio station, after I graduated high school, I took a news reporter position and worked there while attending college locally. And then along came a reporter opportunity in San Francisco at the CBS radio station. I withdrew from college to take it, and, life kind of took over from there. So yes, I was a bit of an overachiever and impatient when it came to pursuing what I wanted. In the end, though, it served me well, and what I wanted was a career in broadcasting above anything. And through sheer determination, some really lucky breaks, and strong and patient mentors, I managed to box above my weight class for a good portion of my career, dropping out of college in my junior year, and by the time I was 24, having already held TV on-air jobs in Los Angeles and New York. Now, whenever I tell that story, I feel obliged to offer kind of a disclaimer to students who may be viewing this. Don't try this at home. That was then, and I dare even say with all my youthful charm of those days and that determination, such a path would be virtually impossible today, especially in this era of YouTube and other social media, where mistakes aren't forgiven. In fact, they're weaponized and mocked and live on forever. And Lord, did I make some mistakes, some real doozies. Thank God for the exceptional journalists and technical crews I worked with who helped save me from myself, admonishing me, encouraging me, and teaching through example. I matured and, thanks to them, grew into the journalist I hoped I would become. And I hope that I have now become that guiding hand for others who are coming up in this business. I can't underestimate the value of mentorship. There are people from my past whose voices I hear in my head even now as I sit down at the computer to write a story or start taking notes to prepare for an interview, and I think, boy, if they could see me now. I hope you know just how much this honor means to me, and I sincerely hope in the end I have earned it. At Nightly News, I'm surrounded by many young people who are products of some of the finest journalism and communications programs in the country. They're smart, they're resourceful, dedicated to our craft, and they're really, really good people. Your mission here at the College of Communications couldn't be more vital, preparing the next generation of journalists, storytellers, and communicators to meet new challenges, and none greater than the enormous and growing deficit of trust in America. I feel enormously privileged to do what I do, not just to be an anchor, but to be a reporter. Being a reporter is a high calling. The most memorable and rewarding moments in my career occurred not while I was sitting behind an anchor desk. They occurred when I was in the field as an eyewitness to history. His reporting is why we hold up the legacy of the man for whom this school and award are named. Edward R. Murrow set the standard for broadcast journalism. His dispatches and vivid descriptions from the war captivated audiences here at home, demonstrating the power of electronic media. His stories were impactful. He was not intimidated by risk, whether exposing himself to the dangers of documenting combat air missions over Europe or confronting powerful politicians like Joseph McCarthy. Truth and integrity were at the core of his reporting, the same values that will sustain the credibility of journalism today as it weathers a sustained attack from those who wish to diminish our role and standing. I was thinking the other day, wow, we have vaccines, 3 of them for COVID. But we're going to need more than that to defend the principles of a free and independent press, one of the pillars of a functioning and healthy democracy. Like a lot of American families in the 60s and 70s, the evening network news was appointment viewing in my household. There were no text alerts of breaking stories or CNN. We turned to programs like nightly news for what was often our very first read in what was happening in a world that seemed unhinged. I came of age as the Vietnam War raged. College campuses became hotbeds of protests. Race riots broke out in big cities, and we lost Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. to assassins' bullets. Watergate brought down President Nixon. Anchors like Walter Cronkite and John Chancellor led us through it every night. Today, the world may seem similarly unhinged. A pandemic, political dysfunction and upheaval, racism and violence in the streets. And today, audiences are again flocking to network newscasts. In a 24-hour news world, by the time you sit down with me, I get it. There's a good chance you already know at least the first brushstrokes of the day's major headlines. You tune in, I suspect, to understand it all and find perspective. And I can tell you we take that responsibility very seriously. Of all the things our nation is grappling with, in my opinion, the most worrisome is the death of truth and trust in our institutions. And please know this is something I've expressed worries about going back long before this previous administration. It's been a slow erosion, with the answers and conclusions already preloaded for us on social media or opinion-oriented programs. We have increasingly lost our critical thinking skills, the ability to hold things to the light and ask key questions for ourselves, unafraid that the answer may not be what we'd hoped. Sometimes a story will drop in our laps in the newsroom. It seems huge, but then we begin to tug at it and pull at it, looking for holes, and suddenly it falls apart. You at home never see that story because we couldn't establish it or at least frame it in a reasonable way, so it never got on the air. The old joke in newsrooms is, darn, another great story ruined by over-checking. But checking and verifying is what journalists do. But it would be arrogant to hold to the idea that we, traditional journalists, are the only gatekeepers of information, that only we know the facts and what matters. Every day we make decisions about what stories we'll cover, how long that story will be, what angles we will explore, and where it will fit into the program. Please know, these decisions are a product of discussions that begin early in the morning and continue right up to when we go on the air. The NBC Nightly News brand is more than 75 years old. The program's reputation for integrity and trust has been hard-earned, and it's something we don't take for granted. But we know we don't just compete with the folks on the other channels anymore. The democratization of journalism, made possible by smartphones and the internet, has opened a whole new hyperspeed network of raw and often unfiltered information. In the meantime, traditional journalists spent the last 4 years being labeled enemies of the people, blasted from the world's biggest megaphone. And it didn't come without a price. It's hurt the standing of journalism and allowed misinformation, some of it dangerous, to gain critical mass. And it forced us down a path towards what at times was a toxic relationship between the executive branch and the Fourth Estate. That's not a healthy place for any of us. The media's reliance on truth and facts was turned upside down and weaponized as evidence of lies. The more we try to separate fact from fiction, the easier it became to label us as partisan tools. Dog bites man is not a story. It's common. Happens all the time. But man bites dog gets your attention, right? We don't see that. So it's news. Safe to say we chased a lot of those stories the last several years, things we'd never seen before. Now, whether they were good or bad is irrelevant, but we couldn't look away because they were new and different and had to be reported. I'm asked a lot now how the news media recovers from the damage. Let me first say the damage only goes so deep, as millions and millions of Americans still turn to news organizations like mine for trusted information. The unprecedented attacks on the press in this period, I'm sure, will fill plenty of books and be studied in classrooms, maybe even here. But I have a few early observations I'll share about where this moment brings us and what we can learn. Number one is, I think it's become clearer that fairness is overrated. Well, before you run off and tweet that headline, let me explain a bit. The idea that we should always give two sides equal weight and merit does not reflect the world we find ourselves in. That the sun sets in the west is a fact. Any contrary view does not deserve our time or attention. Now, I know recent events assure that you won't have to look far to find more current and relevant examples. I think you get my point. Decisions to not give unsupported arguments equal time are not a dereliction of journalistic responsibility or some kind of agenda. In fact, it's just the opposite. Providing an open platform for misinformation, for anyone to come say whatever they want, especially when issues of public health and safety are at stake, can be quite dangerous. Our duty is to be fair to the truth. Holding those in power accountable is at the core of our function and responsibility. We need to hear our leaders' views, their policies and reasoning. It's really important, but we have to stand ready to push back and call out falsehoods. Now, I understand what I just said will only reinforce negative sentiments some hold to journalists, and that leads me to my second point. The need to be respected versus the need to be liked. Let me be frank. Media companies proudly invest in promoting the quality of their journalism, and rightfully so. But they also invest in the faces of their organizations to help weave a relationship and identity with audiences and readers. While we all like to be liked, we don't let that stand in the way of calling out uncomfortable truths. That we have had to be more direct in our language in recent times only speaks to the volume and gravity of particular statements and claims. Remember this, fact-checking is not a vendetta or attack. We all have a stake in us getting it right. And lastly, on where we go from here, we will need to take a hard look at our respective lanes and how we make sure we stay between the lines. The TV media landscape can look very, very much the same. People who are well-dressed sitting at plexiglass desks against giant video screens with lots of words on them. But the content can be very different. Opinion-oriented cable programming featuring provocative and often partisan voices is popular, and it has its place. But it should not be confused with mainstream newscasts, which have their place too. Informed, knowledgeable analysis is not the same as opinion. I think all media could benefit from greater transparency as to who we are and what our chosen lanes are. As we strengthen the bonds of trust, we should not be afraid to take satisfaction from revealing reporting, but there should be no place for snark, belittling, or arrogance. But we need a willing public partner to help shore up the pillar of journalism, which gets back to you, our audiences, and the value of critical thinking. At the beginning of my remarks, I told you about how I learned on the job. Without guidance, I would have simply failed. If you have ever tweeted or Facebooked an account of something, you're effectively a citizen journalist and learning on the job. And thanks to technology, you're capable of commanding massive audiences. And it's a big responsibility. We have all seen the cost of taking it lightly or recklessly. Whether in 240 characters or in a 30-minute newscast, we need to weigh our words, consider our sources, report what we know to be true, not what we wish to be true. News literacy is extremely important. We must help our audiences understand what our role is in a healthy democracy. Because if we're not asking the right questions, who is? Imagine, if you would, what the pandemic would look like without the media holding leaders to account for vaccine rollouts or countering harmful misinformation or why some communities are being left behind. Regard for truth must regain a foothold in our society so that we can weather the storms of tomorrow's calamities, tomorrow's pandemics. And on that, I want to leave you with this. You may have heard this quote before, but even Edward R. Murrow understood the potential limits of credulity in the face of stories and events that overwhelm us. Reporting from the just liberated Buchenwald concentration camp in 1945, he said, "I pray you to believe what I have said about Buchenwald. I have reported what I saw and heard, but only part of it. For most of it, I have no words." That was reporting from the heart, with humility and regard for his audience. An example of what journalism will always aspire to be. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the honor. And go Cougs.
Thank you for that outstanding speech, Lester. I truly appreciate it. Appreciate your outstanding work as a journalist. You spoke to some of the most pressing issues that journalists face today. As you know, in a real sense, the legacy of Edward R. Murrow is a legacy of truth. As he prepared to face Senator Joseph McCarthy, he is reported to have said that we should tell the truth and fear no man. In your mind, how do you believe his thinking informs our legacy today?
The legacy is relevant, but I think the challenges are deeper because we're seeing not differences of opinions on issues. We're seeing different planets of opinions where we're not even speaking to the same truths or same set of facts. And that's, frankly, I see that as a challenge to all communications, and certainly for journalists as well, as we try to, impart the truth and try to bring factual reporting. When you have, an audience or members of an audience who don't even agree on basic facts, it makes it much more difficult. And all we can do really is kind of, press ahead and continue to do what we do, and recognize that most people do appreciate and understand the work that we're trying to do and why it's important in our society.
Right, right. What do you think citizens can reasonably expect from journalists, given some of these issues, and as you pointed out, opinions that come from vastly different perspectives? What should citizens expect from journalists?
I think people really, more than anything, they want validation. They're hearing news nonstop. It's a cacophony of voices and noises. I mean, for the moment you turn on your phone in the morning, assuming you left it off at night, until you turn it off, you're just being bombarded with information. And so what I think, especially in a program like ours, in the mainstream media, you're looking for some validation, some verification of what you're hearing. How do I put this information? Is it true? I keep joking that we're all becoming amateur epidemiologists over the last year. And we're constantly, hey, I heard a new study out of Germany. I heard a new study out of Israel. I hear that women get sicker after taking the second dose of Pfizer. All those things are coming at you. And I think, our role is to try and verify and validate, what what you're hearing, try to put it in some kind of perspective. And to do that, though, we're also education is part of our mission, is to educate viewers about our role, about, fact checking, about the whole idea that if something really sounds too good to be true, it often is. And we see that all the time. And as I mentioned in the speech about, another story killed by over-checking, but it's important to ask the questions. We tend to have, I think, we tend to react to news that affirms our values if it's absolutely true, because why do you want to test it if it perfectly encapsulates your view on a particular issue? So all those things we have to navigate, but it's important for us to continue to remind the viewer, what it is we're about, what our role is, and what their role as a viewer is as well.
What do you think citizens' role is as part of the news process?
I think it's to take a deep breath and look at their sources of news. When I ask someone, where do you get your news? And they say Facebook. I'm always like, okay. There's a lot on Facebook, and there's a lot of interesting news, and obviously a lot of opinions. And so I hear those kind of terms, and it worries me. I'm not trying to slam Facebook, but it's very, it's got to be more than that. And so I think, yes, I hope that people will come to an organization like ours with a natural trust because of our years of integrity and experience. But I think that we've all got to, look at things a little skeptically. I think it's okay to be somewhat questioning of what you're hearing, and, take a moment. We're on our smartphones or our computers all day. It takes a second to Google and look a little deeper and try and verify information and see if it fits into, what you think that story is.
Sure, sure. Back in the 80s when I was in journalism school, we talked about reporting in an unbiased fashion, essentially. And later on, we sort of evolved into kind of balance and fairness. Do journalists, and you spoke to this in your speech, do journalists validate specious arguments by acknowledging them and speaking to them? And then if they don't speak to them, are they opening themselves up to accusations of bias?
That's a tremendous question, because it's something that we're wrestling with in real time. Yeah. We haven't in real time. Depending on who's speaking, if it's the President of the United States, you obviously have a deference, and you think of the information that they have to impart is something automatically worthy of news. We've just been down a road, and I hate to go down this road because it opens up politics and bias. But look, the reality is there were a lot of serious false claims down the stretch, especially as it came to, whether the election was rigged and all those things that had been put out there. We couldn't ignore that story because of where it was coming from, but we did have a responsibility to police it and monitor it. Mm-hmm. And there were times when we didn't carry, parts of news conferences or discussions because of the danger. And we now, of course, we're validated in the belief that could be dangerous. We saw what happened, obviously, at the Capitol. So it's huge, and it's really, really difficult because those of us of a certain age, were brought up that, you give extra weight and special deference to, an office as high as the presidency, right, and to the idea that you might police the speech of someone of that high caliber it just goes against our grain and DNA. But we do have a responsibility for, what happens after that news leaves my mouth, what people do with it. And we have to be sure that they understand what's true and not true. So, I think the public is now used to hearing the term, fact-checking and fact-checking in a debate. Obviously, it's something we've always done, but I think we have all learned a valuable lesson in how critical it is. So it's tough. We don't like to be caught up in these arguments of politics and things like that. But we can't offer a free platform for anyone to say whatever they want, especially when it's something that could affect the health and safety of people.
Right, right. You raise a great question in my mind about how we treat political leaders who sort of use media in one sense when they like the news or when they have good news to report, and then belittle media or disregard media when they feel like the news is negative or speaks against their personal perspectives or desires. How do we treat political leaders in that process of news gathering?
I think that's pretty normal. I think that that's something we've always seen, to some extent, as cover politics. Politicians love good news. They love information that validates who they are and what their beliefs are. And we all know the term blame the messenger. So it's something that we're used to and we understand. I think the key is that we have to make sure that we're firing on all cylinders, willing to call out things that are not accurate or things that are misleading. And I think when people watch what we do, they'll understand that that's part of our role. It's President Biden now, and he's got to own the immigration, and we're covering that story aggressively. I'm sure if they don't like him, they don't want to call it a crisis necessarily, but we have to call it what it is. And so that's what we do on a regular basis. I think somehow we got wound up into this, in the sense that we were for one guy and against the other guy. Right. Our bias is for the truth. Let me tell you, if it was there, we'd be all over it. And I think that sometimes that gets lost. That would be a huge, huge story. And if we got a sniff or a nibble that had happened, it would be wall to wall.
You mentioned citizen journalists and digital social media. In your mind, have this, anyone with a Facebook account can basically become a journalist in a sense, and can self-publish their own news with no fact-checking, and that's really been a challenge for journalists. Do you believe citizen journalism has hurt or helped traditional news media?
I think it's helped us in terms of, any whiffs of arrogance now have to be left on the roadside because, we're not out here. You don't have to watch the big three networks to get news. We hope you will. We've got a lot of experience. We've got a lot of resources. We can go deep and broad. But the fact of the matter is, there are people out there who are citizen journalists who are doing the best they can and they're reporting what they know. To have an organization like ours, we have the resources for, serious fact checking, legal checking, background information, and sources. But I think the danger of it is it disguises journalism. Things that look and kind of smell like journalism, but maybe they're not. Right. Maybe they do have a hidden agenda. And I think that's where it gets tricky. As I've noted in my speech, there's any number of people who will be on tonight who will be sitting on at glass desks, very much like mine, and they'll have a big, computer image behind them and lots of words on the screen, and it all kind of looks like news.
Right.
And it is to some varying amount, but what I do is considerably different than what some of the very popular opinion hosts do. And I think it's really clear that we find our lane and differentiate ourselves for the viewer, because it's a very different role. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but they're, what we do has to be in a clear reporting mode with analysis and perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Actually, let me ask you about that. It seems to me that one of the things you've done in the last few years is to transition beyond just sort of a provider of news. You've been sort of a little more self-revealing. You've provided some commentaries. You've delivered the news with a bit more sort of personal feeling, I guess, to an extent, and been more personal revealing of yourself. What was your process when you started that, and what were you thinking about, what you're trying to accomplish? Do you feel like it's been helpful to you in your job as a journalist?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's something that started out very organically, and I think it came along slowly. I think it was a recognition that I don't want people to ever think in this world where so many awful, life-changing events are happening that I'm somehow just passionate about it. Nightly news is appointment viewing. I think, they make a choice to sit there and watch us. And I noted in my remarks, chances are by the time they sit down, they know all the hits, runs, and errors of the day, but they want that perspective. And I didn't ever want them to think that somehow I'm just throwing the stuff out there and turning my nose to it. Far from it. I mean, COVID is really the best example. Mm-hmm. We say we're in this together. You're darn right we're in this together. I can't sit there and I'm not reporting something that happened in Syria or China. I'm reporting something that's happening to all of us right now. I can't pretend that I have no dog in this fight. I've got family to worry about. I worry about myself. I want the shots. All those things are happening. So I thought it was important to kind of reflect that sometimes. And when we hit, certainly in the COVID story, when we hit, kind of step back. Here's where we are. This is what we're facing, and speak to what I think people are talking about. I think, I think the first time I did it was another moment like that. We covered a lot of these mass shootings. I found myself in El Paso, Texas, the massacre at the Walmart, and there had been a couple other shootings within the last day or so. And I remember just this feeling of, how the hell is happening to this country? And that's not an editorial opinion. I would bet that a lot of people were saying the same thing. And I started the newscast that night, right? The question on the minds of millions of Americans tonight, what the heck is going on?
Right.
And I didn't want it to be editorial, but I want the viewer to understand, look, I get it.
Right.
And it's okay to have a bias against violence. It's okay to have a bias toward compassion. So I gave myself a little license to go there occasionally, within the limits. I don't want to get over my skis. And we do them when, it feels appropriate. And I'll jot down some ideas and run it past the producers. And part of that discussion is, look, I don't want, let's not get too far out, but let's reflect what people are seeing. Let's, journalists and everyone are feeling and find a way to give voice to it. And so that's kind of where it is. I haven't done one in weeks. I may find a reason to do one tomorrow or maybe 6 months from now.
I see.
I made sure we weren't going to promote it.
Very good, very good. I want to be respectful of your time. We don't have a lot of time left, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your feeling about students and their career preparation. I very much appreciated your sort of being self-revealing in your talk about some of your own processes, the things that you went through. How should students prepare for their careers, and what's the right balance between some of the skills they need in terms of the writing and those kinds of things versus some of the critical thinking skills, the news literacy skills that you referenced in your talk?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's all important. Study what works. I know when I was coming up, you turn on the evening news and you watch Porter or something, and the sense of authority, whatever it was, and I would kind of take mental notes of that, and I would borrow some of it, frankly. And, you borrow a little here, borrow a little there.
Right.
And that, it's really important, I think, to watch with a careful eye and try to figure out what works, what makes those people good communicators. In terms of skill sets, writing is so important to what we do. I do a newscast that whittles down to about 23 seconds. The stories are very short sometimes, and you'll get a minute and a half, minute 45, 2:15, party on down. It's a lot of time.
Right.
But you've got to be able to write in a concise way that touches on the key points of the story, that tries to find some, appropriate balance in that story. And the only way you can do it is writing. And so I tell people, spend a lot of time working on that. It's very important. Obviously, the internships and those things are critical. Talk to people in the business because, step away from the glamour. Sure, there's a little glamour involved with being on TV, but it's also really, really hard work.
Right.
You have to bring it every day. It's tough on family. I don't know if we talk about things like that enough. That, you get that call and you got to be someplace hours from now. You hop on a plane and you go there and you're not sure when you're going to come back. So it does take a toll on your personal life. All those things I think are important considerations.
Very good, very good. Well, one last question as we wrap up here today. If you had a crystal ball and had to look down the road in 5 or 10 years, how do you think journalism might change in the future?
I think that, I think you're seeing the change, the change to digital, which doesn't really change the job of journalism. We talk about that a lot at NBC. We keep peeking around the corner to figure out how people will consume our product,
Mm-hmm.
The computer to the smartphone, will it be the wallpaper in your living room? I don't know. But the job of being a journalist doesn't really change. It's all the same things, shining light in dark places,
Right.
voice to voiceless, all those things. It's the platforms that are changing. But in terms of what we've just gone through and people looking at journalism as it's been under attack, I do think you're going to see more people coming back and finding comfort and finding a safe harbor for news, because it is a noisy environment out there.
Right.
It's firing at you, every which way you look, and I think people will come back. You certainly see it on the evening programs that many a pundit has predicted the death of the evening newscast, and on the contrary, we continue to have huge relevance and huge audiences. So I think we'll be strong, and as I said, I think it's really going to be the platforms that are changing.
Very good, outstanding. Well, Lester, thank you so much. Really do appreciate your time. And
my pleasure. Well, thank you again for the tremendous honor and what you guys are doing. It's an important mission. My own career path notwithstanding, we certainly recognize the importance of having, young people who are prepared, who understand, what journalism is about, the challenges, and also hopefully they'll come along the ways to make us better at what we do.
Lester, thank you for your time tonight. We appreciate your outstanding work as a journalist, and we're honored to have you as a 2021 recipient of the Edward R. Murrow Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Broadcasting Journalism. Take care, have a great day, and we'll watch you tonight.
Okay, terrific.
We sincerely appreciate your outstanding work as a journalist and your participation in the 2021 Murrow Symposium. We look forward to your continued participation tomorrow during our fireside chat. For those in the audience, thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate your support of and engagement in the Murrow College of Communication. In the words of our own Mr. Murrow, good night and good luck.